I call Kevin Haig.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a good bill. It's largely technical in nature, and it's one that we're happy to support at third reading. But like the Honourable Annette King, I want to provide a little bit of context as is appropriate at third reading. As Ian Lees-Galloway described in the committee stage, the progress of this bill has been extraordinary and also chaotic. And I certainly this morning had to refresh my memory of much of the content of the bill because it's so long since we last debated this bill in the House, and to now be progressing it through all of its remaining stages under urgency is a little extraordinary. And one of the things that I noticed, Mr. Speaker, was the commencement date and the change to the commencement date made by the Select Committee, which has turned out to be fortuitous, because if we hadn't done that, the bill was due to have commenced in July of this year, Mr. Speaker, and at the time that the Select Committee was considering it, we had no idea that it would take the government this long, in fact, to come to finalise the bill. It's hard to know if that chaotic nature is a reflection of the Minister Ryle's political lens, as Marion Street has described in the House. He's a minister whose first instinct is to say, does this win my party votes, or does it lose my party votes? He's not a minister who says, is this measure good for New Zealanders' health or bad for New Zealanders' health? I think that's a sad thing. But we don't know whether the chaotic nature of this bill is a reflection of that or of a more general incompetence, either in the health portfolio specifically or around the government's management of its House program more generally. Certainly, part of the context for this bill that I want to talk about is workforce. And Minister Ryle has, for example, trumpeted a number of increased doctors, a number of increased nurses, both of which have been shown to be outlandish claims that are not supported by evidence. His claim of new doctors, for example, when asked about increased specialist numbers, his new doctor numbers include a very large number of junior doctors who are not, in fact, specialists. His increased nurse numbers increase a very large number of nurses who previously worked in our hospitals under contracts and are now employees, so do not reflect any increased nursing capacity. So a certain disingenuous use of data. And Mr. Speaker, neither of those numbers reflects a maldistribution of those health professionals. Now, why this is important is because New Zealand is going to be facing, and indeed already is facing, a massively increased burden of disease, particularly associated with chronic conditions. I have used diabetes in this House on a number of occasions as an example of an area where New Zealand is already facing this massively increased burden. If New Zealanders today require renal services, they will be lucky to receive them. And they'll be lucky to receive them because those services are already being overwhelmed by the burden of disease associated with diabetes. Now, that burden of disease is due to increase even more rapidly, both because of the ageing New Zealand population, but also because of the burgeoning incidence of type 2 diabetes. To the extent that it seems likely, based on the PricewaterhouseCoopers projections and based on the work done by University of Otago researchers on current prevalence of diabetes, type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes, that in just 8 short years, 2021 New Zealand will have moved from spending around $500 million currently to spending around $2 billion each year on type 2 diabetes alone treatment. Now that, Mr. Speaker, is a massive increase in the burden of disease that our health services will face, and it is an increase that we are ill-equipped currently to bear. And this government is doing precious little about preparing us for that impact. In fact, in the face of that impact, this is a minister, Tony Ryle, who has actually slashed spending on preventing type 2 diabetes, a massive, massive problem. So against that extremely worrying picture, the one bright light that I can pick from the government's performance is, in fact, this bill, because clearly one of the things that New Zealand will need to do in the face of this impact from chronic conditions is to use our health workforce more intelligently and more flexibly. That will mean health professionals doing things that they are competent to do, that lies within their expertise, but which they are not currently doing. And part of the recipe for reaching that point is to change the regulatory framework that may be preventing them from working to the full scope of their expertise. And that, Mr. Speaker, is one of the things that this bill does accomplish. It will see a wider range of health professionals being able to prescribe and actually use a greater part of their expertise to the advantage of New Zealanders' health. I already see it in the rural area that I come from, the desperate need, and I spoke earlier in this contribution about the maldistribution of health professionals around the country. I already see the need to be doing that in order to provide for the needs of rural New Zealanders. But that need, rural New Zealand, is effectively the thin end of the wedge. What we are experiencing in rural areas will be experienced right through the country as a result of this burgeoning chronic disease burden. And Mr. Speaker, a bill like this that enables that stretched New Zealand workforce to work to the extent of its capacity is a welcome contribution, and we will vote for this bill.
I call Barbara Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure